Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Welcome back to another episode of the South Coast Artists Index podcast, and I'm your host, Ron Fortier, and we have two guests today, and you know the routine. If you listen to the show regularly, I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves and spell their names, and the head chicken of this soon-to-be event, which is why they're here, and you'll soon find out about it, will also tell us a little bit about the event itself, and then we'll just keep rolling from there. Yes?
Yes, thank you. My name is Phillip Mellen. That's two L's in Phillip, and J, M-E-L-L-E-N for Mellen. The project is called Could Not Have Done This Without You. We put together an album. There's 14 collaborators, and mostly musicians, poets, and artists that are basically putting different voices and music to some of my poetry. Let's see. And of course, we put together an album. The album is called Ghost Writer. Both the project name and the album name is sort of a play on what happened. Also, we have one of the collaborators on the project here too, and her name's Knutsen. I'll let her spell your name as Ron suggested.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kat Knutsen. I always tell people to think of the last name is like a canoe, and then Zen, K-A-T, and then last name is K-N-U-T-S-E-N.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things that you've got to go through forever and ever, spelling out your name.
Canoe, I like that.
Yeah. Not Knutsen.
Knutsen.
So, tell us about Couldn't Have Done It Without You. I could be just totally out of touch, but this is, I think, kind of, well, at the very least, rare to have this kind of collaboration between performing artists and a visual art component as well.
All right, yeah.
So, yes?
Yes, it's...
And how did this idea burst full-formed in your head like Venus?
Well, it was kind of a little bit slower than, and it never really organized until, I sent out the first email, and originally it was just going to be me working with one of the collaborators to add some music to my poetry, like I had mentioned. I guess it first started probably back in 2009, 2010, under the project name. Our band name was going to be Mother and Child, and it was kind of just off-the-cuff name for it. Had a picture of the Madonna and Child, of course, on my wall, so that just sort of became something gestured towards. But yeah, I guess basically this time around, here we are a number of years later, I guess picking up where we left off with some of the collaborators and adding taking some mid-chapter experiences I had with people that I met maybe in between that, and then some current collaborators that I met recently in the last few years. So there's I like what Kat called it, the project as a whole.
It's like a time capsule.
Yeah. So it really kind of opened up along the way ever since I sent out an audio email sort of invite to the first batch of collaborators, and that was in November of 2021. So we've been at this a while, and it's finally the album is finished on vinyl, and we're going to have the two listening parties at the Co-Creative Center. The collage show will accompany that, so I made a collage for each song. And there's 12 songs in the album, and it'll probably be somewhere between 15 and 20 collages. I couldn't stop, so I just kept making.
What size are those?
Those, good question. They're they're modeled after like the vinyl record itself. The framing is actually specifically album frame, like jacket cover frames, if that makes sense.
What is that, 12 by 12?
I think
They're
so.
they're like 12 and a half, the jacket, but of
Right.
course records are 12 by 12,
Right.
well, 12 circle.
Right.
So, and a lot of the compositions are based on a circle, 12 inch. And so, yeah, and I just tried to basically pull elements from whether it was the lyrics or some of the music I had already, and just some of my daydreams surrounding some of the songs, you know. And some of them are just really sparked color in my mind, so that's kind of where I pulled some of it. There's recurrence of some hands and some dandelion leaves and even the heads of dandelions, simplified and sort of graphically or abstractly somewhat put together. So, yeah, and so that, like I said, it's going to be at the Co-Creative Center. The art show will be from the 19th of July to the 28th, and the listening parties will be on July 21st, the first one, from 2 to 4. And then the second one to close the show is going to be on July 28th from 2 to 4. And yeah, the Co-Creative Center, in case you don't know, is at 137 Union Street. So yeah, Dina Hayden, also on the project, has opened up the doors for us. So I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully, get some people in and check out the album. And of course, a lot of the collaborators will be there. So
All right.
yeah.
Kat, what made you consent to be a collaborator, or did you beg him to be a collaborator when you heard about it?
When I first heard about this project, I didn't understand the scope of the project, the focus of the project, the intent of the project, but it involved creating, collaborating, and a chance to kind of be an audio artist or a music artist. At the time, I was starting to make these sound sketches on the piano. And so when Phil reached out to me about the project, I think I ended up doing the project in reverse of how it was originally intended, where Phil wanted me to write a piece in response to a poem. And I thought I was supposed to write a piece first, and then he was going to write a poem to that. So I ended up sending him a couple of pieces that I was working on. I think you chose one. I can't remember the name of the title of it.
Well, originally I think you titled it Icicles, but then
Yes.
we switched it to Pace Yourself because of the
I
poem
like
that
that
was
title
attached.
more, the Pace Yourself more.
Oh yeah?
I do.
Oh cool.
And so the piece that I was working on, which is called Pace Yourself on the album, it was a mood atmospheric journal entry where I was playing with chord progressions and simple rhythm. And, I've always been a big fan of music scores like John Williams, James Horner, and how music kind of like helps elevate or illustrate a mood.
Yeah,
in a
it
way.
does.
So-
I mean, I know one of the reasons why I like spaghetti westerns is
Yeah.
because of Ennio Morricone.
Now the piece that it's very simplified, piano piece. It has, a couple of chords that are, playing around with, some basic rhythm, and the chords are modulating here and there. And there's like a little melody that's following it. But I was more thinking visual when I wrote the piece. So the fact that I'm a part of a project that's multifaceted, combining poetry and sound, and then it's also a time capsule where there's a lot of artists that I've worked with at different capacities with different projects over the years. And the fact that the project's kind of like 3 eras stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good way to describe it. I think
That's a good one.
that's
yeah,
really cool.
Of, like my personal New Bedford experience going to see bands play, and that's part of it, was just to work with bands that I've seen over the years. And back to Kat's piece, I think it doesn't sound labored over, and it's like it has some really nice tones to it. And the poem that I recorded to go with it, it wasn't like until I placed them together that I found the timing was right, and the shift of the poem, and also in her composition. So it really it closes side A on the album, and I think it's a nice touch.
Yeah, it's always good to have especially because I haven't listened to a CD in forever, and CDs evolved from the LP, the vinyl LPs, and how they were set up and so on and so forth. But to have that first side close, because it gives you anticipation, or you want to hear the other side, which you hope isn't going to be a disappointment, obviously. But what you guys were talking about was painters will put music on in their studio depending on their mood, especially abstract painters, and that gets them in the mood. So it's either going to be blues or it's going to be symphonic music, orchestral music. But musicians, what are their visual references? I mean, you're both, so this ought to be interesting.
Well, for me, it's like an echo. Like I'm looking at one of your paintings right now, Ron, and one of the things that stands out, there's this really beautiful pacing of the big marks in the middle, and there's this, it's not filigree, but there's these really cool, consistent rhythmic, like small lines, so that could easily, the way that it's structured, almost like a grid, makes me think rhythm in a way. And then the contrast that's happening in the painting is really beautiful. It's kind of synonymous. It's not like an aggressive, hard contrast. It's very peaceful. So, that could be interpreted in a lot of ways. Myself, I'd think, okay, we're not going to venture out into a lot of different keys. Maybe we'll stay within a scale, or maybe we'll stay within maybe only one modulation. I love modulating, but the rhythm, it's fun to take a visual stimulus and then create some sort of audio hypothesis and then see what that sounds like, but then remove the initial visual stimulus and just look at what you have in the audio sense,
right?
And then let that grow almost like in its own like mitosis way, its own petri dish way, and see what comes from that. And then working with other musicians, other artists, letting them add their bit to it, letting them see what well, when I see this or when I hear this is what I think, and then welcoming that part of the collaboration into it, and then setting up some sort of deadline or goal, like what are we going to do with this? Is this going to be a song? Is this going to be a part of a background sound for a video? Is it going to be just like some fun play? It's not necessarily going to be turned into anything or finished into anything, but it's an ongoing response, to stimuli in a way.
Yeah, and it is about stimulation, isn't it? So we really have three elements then, because we have the music, obviously, the auditory.
Yeah.
And we have the visual, which are the collages. And of course, spoken is auditory, but the spoken word brings it to another level, because it can be abstract language, but generally people start forming word pictures from that. And if there's a connection, then you can see the eyebrows go up and the smiles on the face and such.
What do you mean when you say connection? I like how you use that word.
It's funny what triggers people. I'm trying to think of he was a poet laureate of Canada. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it's a poem that I go back to whenever, and it's called "There Were No Signs," and it's about this journey of life that we walk down this road, and there are no signs. There are no directional signs. There are no signs of bad weather. There's nothing to guide us. We're just walking on, and it's not about faith or anything, but it is about faith. That we're just walking, and we're trying to correct ourselves, in our journey. And I think the last stanza is, almost now I am the man I set out to be. Something like that. It's been a while. Almost, yeah. And one step more, and I'll be back where I began. And that in my head, I can see that complete circle, almost like those movie effects where, they used to have this famous commercial for a perfume or a cologne back in the 70s. It might have been Arpege. I don't remember, but it's two people on a beach, a man and a woman, and they're running towards each other. The wind is blowing. Their clothes out, so that they look like the Nike, the winged angel, and they're running and they're getting closer, and then they go further and closer, and then further. And they never actually ever touch. Yeah. It's like it's never finished. It's never finished. It's kind of weird, right?
Right.
And then I think I spoke with you about this last time, and I've got to find that because it's driving me crazy, and I want to know how well my memory has retained it. but I do know it was for the Uniroyal tires, which was a very well-known brand in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it was for a specific tire that they had for driving on rain called the rain tire. And I do know there was a jazz kind of bass line, right, that kind of thing. And I think there was brushes, instead of drumsticks, the brushes on the snare drum kind of. Already you got that nightclub sort of feeling. You almost, the smoke and all that kind of thing. And the copy or the text of the VO, the voiceover, was very much taken from the beat poets. And the guy, you see the visuals of this car's traveling in the rain, going to tire store, looking for, do you have the rain tire? The rain tire. And I just love that. And it was done by a really famous voice actor. And I've got, there are some of those things just don't exist. They were never held on to because I guess they didn't think that, what value was in this, or just I'm not looking right. But that's the kind of, and I did get a sneak peek and sneak listen to the files that you sent me. Yeah, I think it's going to be quite exciting. And the only other thing I can think of is what's the atmosphere in the Co-Creative Center going to be like? Are you going to change the atmosphere in there?
Well, I hope so.
Short of fog machines.
Right. No, not necessarily that. Well,
but
actually,
lighting,
now that you
actually,
mention it,
the lighting, yeah.
Well, there's actually some sort of backdrop / mural type thing. It's going to be freestanding, free hung part from the ceiling, part from the infamous stone wall they have at the Co-Creative Center, and I'm kind of hoping that people will be a little playful with it and maybe take some pictures in front of it.
Is that a sculpture? Is that an installation?
It's kind of. It's somewhere in between, I think. Like, I think it's almost like a relief sculpture type thing. Or it's modeled after the collages themselves, so the shapes are similar, and sort of leaves, but very much it might be like considered like a logo in a way. So maybe it'll be the unofficial logo for the show. I'm not really sure, but I hope people get playful in front of it, and I'm going to try to take one of my own selfies, if you will, in front of it, and. I might set myself up in front of it because I'm going to do some reciting at the second listening party, and so
it'd be fun to make some simple instructional signs telling people to take selfies, but not actually saying take a selfie.
Right.
Like say something a little bit more nebulous, but says to take a selfie, and then put that.
This is a good spot for a selfie.
Like, are you here right now? The camera logo behind it.
Yeah. Nice.
So at the end of the day, at the end of the week, the month, and the decade, where is this going to be at? What's the retention of this? And believe me, I have no preset answer in my head.
Yeah.
It just popped out there.
When you say retention, what do you mean?
The how much will it be remembered? Will be an experience that people will retain, because everything now is so fleeting. It's so, and I've brought this up with several people before. There's a great film that you got to watch. It was on Netflix. I don't know if it still is. It's called The Impossible Project, but a Belgian guy who was obsessed with Polaroids. And he was really ticked that Polaroid was no longer in business as the original Polaroid land camera. So he started doing some investigating, and he went to the very top of the company with the present CEO at the time they did this film, and found out they even lost the recipe. I mean, how do you lose that? I mean, this is like one of the most important inventions ever. And people think, oh, it's a Polaroid. No, it had a lot of applications. And then partly it started to mimic the arts and crafts movement of the 1840s in England, where people were so ticked off about the sameness of the Industrial Revolution. So, yeah, I've got the same chair the cat does, and she has the same chair as you do. Where's the uniqueness? Where's the craftsmanship? Where's, it's just sameness, and there's no humanity. There's no human touch. Yeah. And it started a movement in Europe. I don't think it's really fully come over here yet. It's an anti-digital movement, and the younger generations want tangible things. That's why LPs are coming back. They want to hear that needle drop. They want to hear that before the anticipation builds up. But one of the lines, and I got to watch it again specifically for that line, was all the love texts that you sent to your significant other, are they wrapped in a ribbon in a shoebox? Will they be found wrapped in a ribbon in a shoebox in the attic or in your closet somewhere? And it was like, what? And then the realization is, oh my God.
Yeah.
Texts are fleeting. How do you, all this correspondence that we have created between each other is, except for a trial or court, somehow they get a hold of that information, right? As proven by the last episode in New York City. But really, where are all those things?
I think the show might have it all, really, or at least three major parts of it. There's going to be the fleeting quality or the fleeting aspect of the art show, but yet the collages will live on. Hopefully, someone might be interested in picking one of them up, or and of course, that sort of relief wall piece that I'm going to make will probably be fleeting, but the album might be the mainstay, or along with the art, and hopefully we won't lose our selfies that we're going to take that we suggest lightly or funly. I don't know. And there's also going to be performances, so I think it might be four different mediums to present it. So the album itself is 32 minutes long, so I kind of joke with myself, to say that don't blink, because it'll, you'll have to just start over again and play it, I guess, a few times.
Makes me think of like a bouquet of flowers.
Yeah.
Like it's fleeting. Their bloom is fleeting.
Right.
And the event is going to have all these different aspects to it. But then what I think is neat, which is more everlasting, is the roster of creatives that are on the album. Yeah. You follow them. And depending on how well they were curated, are they people who have a high likelihood of continuing their practice? Yeah. Or are they people who have a higher likelihood of stopping their practice? Right. And then what are they doing along the time path in their practice that kind of creates these more Hansel and Gretel, moments that they're not exactly directly connected back to this project, but they are, a part of this project because, their name gets associated with other creatives who are also on that roster in a way. So you kind of get a chance to kind of share like why these people, why this group, and
will they spawn their own or give birth to their own similar?
They're part of the reason why I think I invited everyone is they made an impact on me, whether it's through their music or their art, and some of them also their poetry, and some all three. So I'd like to actually take a minute to read.
I was just going to ask you to do that.
In case those that don't know, if I can pull it up here.
Well, he's looking for that list. Did you find it? Oh, go ahead. I just think it's neat to look at other projects that kind of have similar overlaps with artists. Like one of the first things I think of is Andy Warhol and Basquiat, the different circles that they were in, and looking at how, there's a myriad of different creative circles in this area. And the South Coast Podcast Index is doing a really great job capturing bits of those circles. I think this is another project that, even though it's kind of like a one-off for the time being, it's a really strong capsule that's capturing a lot of those circles. And so
I appreciate that. Thanks. So we have in order of appearance on the album, we have Doug McCormick, who actually lives in Somerville right now, but he's been in countless bands throughout his time, and since I first met him, probably back in those days, maybe 2008 or between that and 2010. Kevin Grant, who actually I sent Doug actually Kevin Grant's audio, him reciting one of my poems, and can't wait for everyone to hear what they did together. And Ethan Weiss is on the album. He's in Lasertooth right now, and along with Mark Aruda, who sort of assisted him a little bit on that Contact is the album. The song. And we have Dina Hayden, of course, is on one of the tracks, the director of Co-Creative, and thanks to her for opening up Co-Creative for us, this project. And Kat Knutsen's on it, of course. to my left here, in case everyone's keeping track. Chris Evil is on the album, who is in Blood Feeder right now. And I remember seeing his band was probably the first one I saw, like way back in the day, Chris Evil and the Taints.
He's been responsible for holding the punk music scene like together in New Bedford over the last couple of decades, hosting a lot of the open mic sessions that happened at Poor Farm Tavern over the years. Now they're starting to happen over at the Dipper. So it's like this open buffet for artists to kind of come share, what they're working on, and also network with one another. So he's pretty pivotal in the music scene.
Yeah, and also in Lasertooth is Kevin Fernandez. He worked on one of the tracks with one of his friends, Ryan Coffey. And we also have Sarah Jane Mulvey, who's does some vocals with me on that track, which is called Wait For Me. And she's also the Poet Laureate of New Bedford, of course. Another collaborator is Nick LeBlanc, which I worked on. I think it's called It Was a Ghost. And he does all the instrumentation and did some wonders with my vocals on that. Keith Borges, who I'll just stop a second and mention that I sent him some of my vocals for one of my poems, and for some reason he couldn't access the audio, so he ended up recording his own vocals, using my lyrics. Mm-hmm. And so when he sent the file back to me, I'm like, of course he plays acoustic guitar beautifully, so I hear that coming in, a little bit of an intro, and then I'm waiting for my vocals, and it's him singing, and I thought, wow, it's like amazing. So that kind of started a little bit
hearing
of a trend.
your words in somebody else's mouth, so to speak.
It was the first time it happened with the project. So,
that's cool.
So that started a trend a little bit with the album. I have a few tracks where it's not actually my voice covering the whole album, which is nice. Some variety there, and of course, to round out the roster is Kristen Dupree on Ghost Co-Pilot, and Shelley Carduce also on vocals on Ghost Co-Pilot. And originally I was I kind of, I don't know if I've told anybody, but you were talking about bass early, like bass lines. The album is, according to me, like I feel for my ear, like pretty bassy. So instead of calling it Ghost Rider, I was joking to myself calling it Bass Ghost, and because there's like a spacey song, so I thought of Space Ghost, that cartoon that some of us liked like way back in the day. I'm not sure if anyone remembers that, but. And of course, just a couple more names. Eric Isaacson, fellow Tauntonian with me, helped with Kat and I on the album cover. Andy Anello took the photos of the collages, and finally Joe Riley did the mastering of the album. So,
nice.
It's a good group.
Really strong roster.
Yeah. So thanks for listening.
No, I mean, I think it's fantastic, and there's a lot of brain candy there for anybody who's, there's a lot of stimulation.
Yeah. And really, I think they had their own pace. I like to think that, I mean, all I really did was send vocals or me reciting something, and whatever came back is just, I kind of let it be in a way. To check on some people, it took a while, but other than that, I just really sat back, and that in the meantime, I kept myself working on collages, and so all that was kind of going on simultaneously, and whether it was through the ether or not, I think that energy was still felt. At least, partially. So, it's nice. And I felt the collages kind of act as a still frame for each song, which of course has its own duration. Mm-hmm. And I just really can't wait for the show. I kind of wish it was tomorrow.
I can imagine the anticipation.
How long has the project been going from day one, since you started putting it together till now?
I have November of 2021 was when I sent out the first email and spoke with the first collaborator. And then I didn't think it was going to be an album. I didn't know what it was going to be. I just thought, hey, we were talking on the phone for a while, I think it was. And then we said, let's do something. And so, and then here we are, 2.5 years later, and we have an album on our hands. So it's kind of nice. There were some nice spots in between. And I forget what I was going to say.
Ron, have you ever started a project not knowing where or when or how it's going to end, but you've got that drive and you're like, I want to do this, and you start reaching out?
It's kind of, I don't want to say a leap of faith, but it's like if you've ever been in super dense fog, but you have the confidence, let's use that word instead of faith, that you're going to be able to get through that fog Yeah. And well, painting abstractly sometimes is that way. You just have no idea where it's going to go. I never preconceive anything.
There's more of a narrative to this, I think, the album itself, and to call it content. Most of them are love songs. There's one ode to a new fan of New Bedford from that perspective, which I was back when. So that kind of opens the album, and really, some of them are simple, short, and some of them are a bit longer, but they're all surrounding, I think, love, and then some kind of a loss and contact and friendship, and the settings for that are like the shore, the city, the afterlife, and there's one more there. I kind of outer space is one of them. So
well, if there's one thing, a preemptive kudos to you is you've got 14 artists involved.
Yeah.
Which is, and any given day of the week, it's like herding cats.
Oh no, it was like
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It really overall, like in hindsight, it was a pleasure because I don't think I ever lost sight of, this is I was so sick of hearing myself recite my own poetry and what better way to do it than invite your friends and people you respect and to become, which I like to think of it as being like a contemporary with them, creator of some kind. So,
I just want to say I admire that you didn't lose focus.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was asking about, like when it started, and Ron's mentioning how many artists are involved and it's like herding cats, but you didn't lose focus.
Yeah.
And from my personal experience so far, herding cats, lots of artists, the need to have a hard deadline is so imperative.
Yeah.
So the fact that there wasn't a strong deadline structure to this project, I think is magnanimous, because I would have gone crazy not knowing where or when things needed to be completed, waiting on others. So the fact that you let things kind of ride out and you kind of kept things very natural, there wasn't a forced timeline system, a forced deadline system. Yeah. And then the project had a very organic completion to it and an organic process as it was being developed. I think that's really, really incredible for someone who loves structure so much and loves having that, designated set of timelines for a project.
I had to let some of those deadlines go because ultimately I just wanted that roster that I read off, to be available and at their schedule. So I let a lot of that go, and it probably wasn't easy at times because I was so like into it and like I get kind of obsessed, So
that's the only way to go.
Yeah.
As an artist, absolutely obsessed.
Yeah.
What was the initial reaction? I mean, when you started soliciting these artists, what was their initial reaction?
I got some nice messages in return because initially the formal invite, if you will, was something I recorded, just basically the history of why I wanted the collaborators, to be on it, and I got a couple of nice messages in return saying, I'm in, I think it's wonderful, the message. And I thought, wow, that's great. Actually, it took me 6 minutes to get it out. It was a 6-minute audio email, but
I remember that.
Yeah. So, and I was actually dog sitting at the time. So I had while the dog slept, I kind of, decided, well, I'm going to pull out my mic and record some type of an invite. And so, and some of the songs took a while, and some of them I think out of maybe some sort of enthusiasm for the project. That it came in the song, it came in the music. I think more so. I think only 3 of the collaborators that I invited couldn't do it because of scheduling. So that's a pretty good list ratio, I guess you could say. So that's a big thank you to them, and that's enough of a response for me.
The other thing too is, as a poet, I just thought about it now, is very similar to being a painter. I mean, a painter will do a painting, and if they never show anyone, and they just put it back on the shelf part that's finished paintings, and they go reach for a brand new canvas, and then sections for brand new canvases. It's almost like that bad question: if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it really fall? So you created a painting that nobody ever saw except you, because you really create it. And then you have a poem that you write,
Yeah.
and you say it out loud to yourself, but no one else has heard it. So it's got to be like really kind of interesting when you recite it or you present it for the very first time. What kind of emotions? What kind of hopes, fears?
I think you're mentioning something earlier. I guess maybe how does it sustain itself, or how will the project live on type thing. I think it's important whether you're visual, what you got to write it down. If you're a poet, kind of thing, record it even. There's a lot of options with being a poet. I think, and what did I not mention? The music, record that too. I think record goes across mediums to just make a record, not vinyl record, but some type of like put it down somewhere on a surface or in an album or in a book or
giving it form.
Yeah, like you have to make it take it out and put it somewhere, whether it's sharing it or so it does have a lasting effect, or for itself too, I think. I'm not really answering your question, but that was just something.
I think it takes on different forms based on how it's presented. If it's written, you don't have the author's voice to hear the intonations.
Yeah.
You hear all the different vocal changes.
And that's another thing too. Mm-hmm. See, a painting, and this is what gets me, interested. A painting can be interpreted in several different ways, but nothing's really changed. Oh, the light shifts and so on and so forth. But the spoken word, like a poem, it's written a certain way, but if you have 5 different presenters, they'll all have their own specific inflections. Just like if you write a score, it won't be played dead on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really quick example of the music side. So we had a different set of musicians playing the Long Swan set list. Long Swan's a band, all soft pop rock, and when different musicians played the same songs, it sounded differently. It was incredible. Like it had a different vibe. Everything was on point rhythmically. The chords were there, but it just sounded different. And so with poetry, like when you have different experiences people have, with those words and the structure of it, that's neat to see that variety of takeaway. Just like when people see the same image and each person has their own takeaway from it, which even if, going back to a question you asked a couple minutes ago, like if nobody heard it, like if a tree fell and nobody was there, did it really fall? If nobody heard the poem or read the poem, like there's at least that bit of expression that the creator gets to have, getting it out, which then it just becomes like a healing, like a self-healing practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've actually tapped into something. And that's probably some of the greatest inventions have always been, you found something that you didn't know you were looking for because you were looking for something else, like how the rubber tires. Yes. I mean, the vulcanization was like, that was a total fluke. That kind of thing.
Yeah, this is definitely inspired by, I'm sure, something, projects I've seen along the way, maybe not exactly the way that it happened for us, but I tend to forget those things, but they become part of my memory. And there's been a lot of New Bedford collaborations, like for albums and what have you. But it just so happens that like I feel fortunate to be able to be a part of that, and because I don't live in New Bedford, but I come here a lot, and there's more than 14 people that I met along the way that were influential. It's just that this started from like when I first got here for myself, and and you said, I believe you said something about like not knowing what you're looking for until you find it. And that was sort of, for myself, I really didn't know what it was like to hang out in New Bedford until very early on. And when I came back from art school from Philly, and it's been great. So, and also I think it had a time to cure, and being an incubator for a while, and all that stuff was going on by these collaborators. They were still doing what they were doing, and I was doing what I was doing, and finally come back together, like, really 14 to 16 years later with some of the collaborators. It's just, it just unearthed more for me. And one of the words in the opening poem is exhumed, and, it just sort of brought back to life some certain things for me, and especially some of my poems, and really a lot of patience and hard work and grace from from the collaborators to back up the words,
Yeah.
And some of the poems were actually freshened up a little bit based on the specific collaborator. And I feel like the collages also, I tried to lighten up the mood a little bit because I thought, I'm being ultra critical of my stuff because there is the underlying narrative. But there's seasons are big, I think, and then there's like change and accepting certain things, and then daydreams about someone that was in your life that no longer is, whether it's a romantic partner or your uncle or what have you. It's all kind of like in there.
If you had a chance to give a talk to a group of younger artists, aspiring artists, and you were going to present an activity, how would you structure that activity so that they could experience something similar? It's not going to have that same longevity to it, but something so that they're able to more comfortably break the ice amongst themselves and have these like almost miniature collaborative moments. How would you frame that?
Initially, I thought like maybe having a 2-session, maybe, and like the first session, whatever people gravitate towards, whether it's a poem or a painting or any kind of medium, and then have the collaborator take that home and either record from it or work from it in some way, whether it's actually on the piece, whether it's recorded piece or painted or what have you, and then come back and see what happened along the way. It's pretty. That'll be a condensed version, maybe, of the project, I guess.
Yeah.
Ron, would you ever participate in something like that?
Yeah, I think I would. And I found that poem. It was Irving Layton, who was, I believe, he was the poet laureate at the time of Canada, and it was called, and if I may, it was called "There Were No Signs," and it starts: "By walking, I found out where I was going. By intensely hating, how to love. By loving, whom and what to love. By grieving, how to laugh from the belly. Out of infirmity, I have built strength. Out of untruth, truth. From hypocrisy, I wove directness. Almost now I know who I am. Almost I have the boldness to be that man. Another step, and I shall be where I started from."
Yeah.
And when I found this was in the dust cover of an Eric Anderson album, an LP from back in the 70s. And I can hear Eric Anderson's, he had a very distinctive voice. He's still performing, but the one thing about that entire album is that poem. And every time, everybody has like, that guilty pleasure, you'll eat like Malamars or something when there's nobody in the house. You'll have just one or two, or you'll have something else. But there's also another kind of thing, like I've heard people say that when they're depressed or when they're in a funk of some sort, they'll watch Forrest Gump, for example, or they'll listen to a specific song. And I think that's what we are. I mean, everybody, it's like a subliminal retracement. I mean, what you've done is you've allowed other people to go into your headspace because you've provided lyrics for them, and they've interpreted those lyrics in an audio sense. That's not apart from the spoken word. I'm sure they did it to enhance the spoken word. It just kind of, and then collaboration is that's it's easier said than done. I mean, you ever see cooks or chefs try to collaborate? I mean, the most famous collaboration ever in culinary history has been Julia Child and Jacques Pepin. And she's like, no, really, this does need more salt. No.
Why was it the most popular one?
They made this collaboration of two famous chefs cooking together, entertainment. That's when cooking went from whatever it had been for centuries to be now really a form of entertainment, at another level.
So they captured the conversation happening as they were both trying to take turns making decisions. Right.
And, being careful not to step on each other's toes, but also where Julia Child's like, no, it really does need more salt or something like that. Standing the ground. And I'm not a musician, but I'm assuming that musicians will do it. It's not just in jazz, but particularly in jazz. It amazes me because most jazz is a big jam. You'll hear something, it stimulates something in your head, and you're just waiting. It's like merging on a highway. You're just waiting for that opportunity to have, to get into that lane, and then you're in that lane. So I think this is so exciting.
Yeah,
is it going to be about music? Is it going to be recorded? Videotape the whole thing?
I thought about that.
I think it really should.
I think initially I thought that would be cool, but maybe if someone else wants to do it, only because I think it's like an event that I think people need to be there, and if it gets recorded, fine, all the better. But I don't know. I tried to think
it's
about
32 minutes primarily, right? I mean, if you do
a
a little bit of people shuffling in and people hanging around after the performance, right?
Yeah. I just go ahead.
This is where I feel like it's a great opportunity to interject, where artists are responsible for creating the opportunity for themselves to capture whatever they want to archive about their project. They're responsible for that. And so for the time, how long is the album?
32 minutes.
So if you wanted to record or archive what was going on, you would need to set that up.
Yeah.
And that's something I feel like as a creative, I've gone through that experience of I've done so much already, Yeah. But you've got to go the whole way to the end of what you think the project needs to encompass.
Right.
It's wonderful to leave things to chance. You don't know what will happen.
Right.
But if there's something that you think might be important, it's imperative to aggressively for yourself do the work to make sure you're able to capture that. When I say aggressively with yourself, I mean Google Calendar, anticipate what would you want it to look like.
Yeah.
It won't necessarily turn out that way, but where would the camera be positioned if you wanted to archive it? Who would be behind the camera? Who's working with you? Who knows how to operate that? How would that be symbiotic? What could that then lead to that creates that potential relationship? But of course, going in the different directions of the collaborations you're working with, that I feel like is a part of chores, which I'm always talking about that creatives need to be doing so that their projects have a higher chance of not only continuing, but the relationships they build with other creatives, they're stronger relationships because you're working with creatives who do their chores. And that's a whole other episode.
And you have two dimensions. You have the live performance where people experienced it live. Yeah. And then you have the recorded performance.
Part.
And Jeff and I have been discussing. This project is still very organic, and it's based on how much time the two of us can put in and how much money we can dig up out there, and between grants, sponsorships, donations, and underwriting and such. But one of the things that Jeff is like, okay, maybe we're just putting too much emphasis on documenting every artist that we can get a hold of, which is it's almost like shoveling against the tide because there's I don't think anybody could tell you there are 3,472 artists in town, and nobody can tell you that. Okay, so. We're now looking into recording performances, only because it is a form of documentation. Right. Because I know my mother, who was a club singer, she was also, she did American Standards, but also a father singer of her generation. There's no recordings of her. There's no known recordings of her. I would go insane if I could hear one.
Yeah.
And something about something that I guess universally everybody could, is not really emotionally attached to, like me wanting to hear my mother's voice when I was a kid singing in those clubs and hearing the ovations and such. The Gettysburg Address. We have the Gettysburg Address written in the back of an envelope. But could you imagine to hear it delivered?
Yeah.
We may either be blown away or go, really? That's what it sounded like? Right, so I'm going for the wow.
So I feel like that turns into a numbers game. You're talking about shoveling against the tide. The numbers game, the more that you do, the more efficient you become. And then you step away from trying to grab all of them to grabbing the more efficient ones, which then it turns into a curating process of what's deemed efficient. Like in my mind, the efficient ones are the ones that do their chores. They're easy to get a hold of, easy to get information about what's going on, who they're working with, what's happening next. So that way, more focus can be in the process of capturing that and not in the process of chasing or herding cats.
Yeah, which is the ratio used to be approaching 3 artists to get one, which was the 4th one. to show. And we're still chasing them. And it's like, oh, yeah, I promised. Some people fill out the guest form and so on and so forth. But this is such an exciting project. We're going to have to start wrapping this up shortly. Any final last words? Anything popped in your head in this conversation, three-way conversation? Something you want to, commit to?
Commit to, huh? On recording, so we can live on forever.
Yeah.
I had something, a list of potential titles or names for the project, which essentially, it's not really a band, it's more of a project, I think, because it's got the multifacets. And one of them, I was trying to think of like how to connect New Bedford and me, but I think it's graciously on the album. But one of them I wanted to talk about is the potential title that almost happened was going to be Missing Person. I didn't want it to be too much of a downer, so I ended up going with a name that was reflective of the project and the people, the collaborators. So
community.
Literally could not have done it without them. So that's that. And it's not couldn't have done this without you, because I first picked the Instagram handle and you can't put an apostrophe in there.
Oh, right.
So a little tidbit, but in case it's hard to remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess I'll mention that the music will be available digitally on Bandcamp, potentially Spotify and the like. But as of July 21st, it'll be available on Bandcamp and, of course, on the record. So on the vinyl lathe cut record. So, and come celebrate with us.
And Kat, your last thoughts?
I think this project's amazing. Could not have done this without you. I think the hashtag is CNDTWY. It's the acronym for that, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this project's incredible. I'm grateful to be a part of this project.
Thank you.
There's probably going to be coverage on it through the Siren publication as well. Yeah. And I think this area is pretty magical. It reminds me of the salon atmosphere, where you have a lot of creatives, different types, different backgrounds, having conversations with one another in this area. I think it's a hallmark of the art scene in this area that's happening. When I say this area, I mean like the South Coast, including Taunton and New Bedford. Yeah. And just try to capture as much of it as you can, because time's fleeting. The creatives that are taking the time to not just be creative and in the moment, but also like kind of cross paths intentionally, collaboratively with those who were right around them in their peripheral. I think that's pretty powerful. Yeah.
I'd like to mention the dates again, if that's all right.
Sure. Not a
problem. So the collage show runs July 19th through the 28th. And there's 2 listening parties at the Co-Creative Center at 137 Union in New Bedford. And the first listening party is July 21st from 2 to 4. It's a Sunday. And then the last closing listening party will be on July 28th from 2 to 4. And, of course, so come to both. Yeah. They'll both be slightly different, so there's definitely something happening.
That's going to be interesting, because I remember from my days in theater as a scenic designer, not a stage actor, the opening night was one thing, the second performance was something else, and there was always that weird vibe. Sometimes the second night was better than the first, and sometimes it was horrible. But it again, there's just so many factors that are involved. Well, folks, I'd like to thank you for listening along with us. We've had as our guest today Phillip J. Mellen, 2 L's in Phillip, 2 L's in Mellen. E-N, not O-N. Yes, he's not that rich. And Kat Knutsen, both area artists. Kat is one of the 14 collaborators on Could Not Have Done It Without You, the incredible event that is going to be coming up in July. And thanks for joining us, and see you next time on another podcast. And be kind to each other out there. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.